think it's a pretty color.
Okay, so far this is just Monopoly. You lied to me. You just wanted to play Monopoly.
This isn't salacious at all.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching Suspenders of Belief. I'm Heavy.
And I'm Traby.
And today we watched Friday the 13th. Part 1?
Sure, we can add that subtitle. I've heard that there are sequels to this.
Yeah, there are quite a few. It's actually one of the longest running franchises of horror ever, isn't it?
There are 12 movies that have Jason in them like this. Whether or not you want to consider them part of the canon or part of the continuity of it is arguable. But yeah, 12 different movies.
That is ironic that there's 12 and there's not a Friday the 13th part 13. You'd think they would have doubled down on that already.
Yeah, there was a rumor going around. What was it, like 2015 we had 3 different Friday the 13ths, and for a while the idea was that they would have the 13th movie to release on an actual Friday the 13th on some point in time, but that just hasn't happened yet.
Well, this is my first time watching Friday the 13th. I know quite a bit about it through osmosis and just exposure to other things, but this is my first time actually watching the movie as it was, so much so that I didn't even know Kevin Bacon was in it, so that was a nice little surprise. But this movie was about this group of camp counselors who are trying to fix up this old rundown camp, and they're kind of being picked off methodically one by one by a off-camera killer. And there's a lot of misdirects where they're trying to make you suspect one thing, and then when you do get the final reveal on who the killer is, it's supposed to be like a subversion of expectations, but it really just feels underwritten, and there's a lot of little things that I think could have been improved in the story.
It's a slasher flick that came out in 1980. We'd previously watched Halloween and Alien. This one owes a lot more of itself to Halloween in terms of its very basic structure with the first-person perspective with the killer and things like that. But it also owes a lot of itself to Psycho in the tone of it, the way the killer operates, the MO, I guess, of the killer, or the characterization of ultimately the killer. And it's par for the course in a lot of ways. It's interesting to watch this from today's perspective and try to anticipate why this became a franchise. Like, what about this elevates it above the multitude of slasher flicks that came out right after Halloween? First of all, the gore in it, I don't know necessarily comparatively to other slasher flicks at the time, but compared to Halloween seems pretty tame compared to what we see. We see decapitation, we see an axe in the face, we see an arrow through the throat. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's definitely pretty shocking if you hadn't seen anything like that before.
Well, one thing about it too is it doesn't shy away from the gore. So it's not just the fact that it takes place because other movies had serial killer or some kind of monster or something stalking and murdering people, but this one was so explicit. It wasn't just, oh, and then a person fell over a well, or then they exploded, but it was like, that's, Kevin Bacon's face reacting to this arrowhead coming through his throat. And you could argue about whether or not the effectiveness of how realistic it looks by today's standards, sure, but at the time, being so in your face about that type of kill was creative and artistic in its own weird way.
The second item that I think helps elevate the movie, even though it's hard to argue that it's executed well, is the twist about the killer. How the fact that it is a relatively unassuming older lady, Betsy Palmer, actress playing Pamela Voorhees. I don't think audiences had anticipated that at all, and the movie doesn't give you any reason to anticipate it either. Like, we knew it was coming because I've either seen it before or you knew about it through osmosis. So it's not a shock by today's standards, but at the time it had to have been just coming out of left field with that twist. And it doesn't feel satisfying because she hadn't been established anywhere in the movie earlier. I think that maybe if we had laid eyes on her, like at the diner when Annie first shows up and all the townspeople are warding her off of Camp Blood, as they call it. Like, that could have been pretty effective had she appeared there, but she didn't. It just comes out of left field. So I think that part of it helped make it memorable. And then, of course, the last thing to elevate the material, I think, is that final jump scare with Jason. I think that was enough to cement this movie as being at least very memorable, and the title and a lot of different things about it. Because there's a lot of flaws with this movie. There's a lot of things that don't make sense.
There were a few places that I felt like the script could have been tweaked to make the movie a lot tighter. And I don't know if it comes from meddling as opposed to maybe test audiences and then decided to kind of add scenes here or there or pick up shots. Or again, when you have just the final product of a movie, it's hard to know exactly what the original intent was and what the original vision was. But you mentioned Annie.
Name's Annie.
All right, Annie, let's go.
and she's set up to be like our protagonist character who, with the start of the film, we're watching or following her along, and oh, she's going to this camp, and people are telling you, oh, you don't want to go to that camp. And then it cuts away, and it feels like you change the channel and you're watching something completely different because now there's a whole new group of characters who are all together and they're talking about setting up this camp. But no one references the other girl who we were introduced to first. So when she's immediately killed and no one even knows that she exists, as far as we can tell, it's not like they're like, hey, where's Susie? She was supposed to be here by 5 and she's not here yet. Like, there's no planting of that seed. It feels disconnected. And then the ending has the same problem, where after you have that like final jump scare shot, which is great, by the way, you then cut to, and it was a dream, or we pulled you out of the water. And it's like, what about the boy? What boy? There wasn't a boy in the water. And it's very like, why are you dialing back on your jump scare? Like, if you didn't want the jump scare, cut it out. If you want to keep the jump scare, cut this out. Like, why do you have both parts in?
I do get the feeling that was a test audience thing, that was put in after the fact, because it does seem to undermine your ending. Because if it had just smash cut to black and then had credits roll after the Jason jump scare, it would have been great. And not to spoiler alert for anything that we might be watching in the future, at some point I'd like to watch Nightmare on Elm Street. It has a similar type of jump scare at the end, but it doubles down on it. It's just like, nope, that's it, over, we're moving on. It is great.
I wouldn't hate that ending so much if maybe this was the start of part 2. The start of part 2 was, her dreaming about that moment and then waking up in the hospital and being like, oh, she actually survived being pulled underwater somehow. Because at least it's like the start of a new story and where it's going from there. But to end the movie like that just felt like it cheapened it. It felt like it robbed the scene of its power that it could have had.
I don't remember how part 2 begins. I know that most of these movies begin with a recap because they come from an era that predates home video from being very predominant. So there's a possibility that an audience member is coming in to watch part 2 and only had seen part 1 a year prior in the theater, so a recap is helpful. But I don't remember, I'd have to watch it again to remember how much of that recap they show. I'm certain they show, Pamela getting beheaded, and maybe they show the jump scare. I don't know if they did or not. I feel like they definitely doubled down on we didn't find any boy, and then they close it on the lake, and then Jason's back. That's the idea. But it's been a while since I've watched it.
So at the end of the day, this kind of closes out our Halloween movie month, and it was kind of fun. We started off with something kind of fun with the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and we talked about the made-for-TV Devil Dog.
Hey, get the title right. It's Devil Dog Hound of Hell.
So then we watched then we watched Halloween first, then we watched Alien, for real this time, and then finally we close out on Friday the 13th. So quite a little journey that we went on through our Halloween spooky month, and I gotta say, watching Friday the 13th and not having Jason show up was just kind of like, what a letdown. I mean, from a modern perspective of like, oh, you see this guy on the cover, like, oh, he's gonna be scary, and we watched this movie and he never freaking showed up. What a ripoff, man.
I don't know, man. I wouldn't make fun of Jason.
Who just thinks that, like, you put on a hockey mask, and you're like, oh, look at me, I'm spooky.
Yeah, how is that scary? That's not scary.
Ah!
You alright? What's going on in there? Yeah, what?